Good evening, everybody. It's today the 10th, yeah. So I'm getting used to my graduated glasses, mostly since my mid-40s, when one day in bed at night I was like, what happened? Something wrong with the light in the book? Never had glasses. I have had readers, and I'm taking them off and putting them on, taking them off, putting them on. And then what I just realized is really nice about getting used to these is, when I give a talk, I need to be able to read, my notes. But when I have my readers on, you're just blurs. So now I can see you and the notes. Wow. To hold my head the right way. You have to be a little more like a bird, I've noticed. you know. I appreciated, I appreciate a lot of things, but one of the things I appreciated was Mari's invitation to come to Doksan, to private interview, which is a core practice in Zen. The word Doksan, it's two characters. Most of the words that are used are two characters. And it means something like, it's strange actually, it means something pretty close to come alone. But there's another person sitting there, so what's that about, And I guess what it's about, I think, is the job of the teacher and of the situation of the private interview. Interview is not even the right word. Is for us to help each other in meeting ourselves, to go alone, to really meet yourself. And not the usual self that we worry about and fret over and are upset by and occasionally very excited by and mostly not, But to meet some other self, some deeper self, some kind of true self. And so the teacher, unless they either have, psychic powers or are a narcissist, can't look inside your head and see what that is exactly. Some of the Zen stories kind of sound that way. But a teacher who's practiced for a while and has practiced holding the space and sitting in the seat and being present and not getting too lost in their small self can sometimes support a situation for both people. I feel like what happens in Dokusan that's really helpful is not anything that one person says and the other person answers, but something that emerges in the middle, something that happens like organically, something that Buddha makes happen, we don't make it happen. And it's not always so flashy. Sometimes it feels very ordinary. But probably when you leave the Dokusan room, you feel different, Some little something happened. And it's an important something. So I just want to make sure everyone knows you're fully invited. And in a way, it's like really nice of us to have it be that, you get to initiate, okay, I'm going to go and put my little card out. But in a way, it would be nicer if we just required everyone to go, because then you have to decide, right? It's like, is it for me? Am I allowed? Am I good enough? Do I have a good question? Is the teacher any good? I don't know, right? So anyway, long story short, stick your card out, and we'll see what happens. Also, don't worry if, there's no need to try to manage the situation. Sometimes people do this. They look around and say, oh, there's a couple people have their cards out. Don't be tempering. Nope. But you don't have to do that. You can trust the system to organize it and If there's more people than there's time, then, next time. And you never know. The meetings are brief, and sometimes more people can be seen, sometimes less. So anyway, I just thought that was nice the way Mari said everyone's invited. You don't have to have any. There's no status, or you don't have to have come here for a year. There's no secret handshake or anything like that. It's just for two conditioned humans to meet as Buddhas and see what happens. We'll see. So the actual topic of tonight's talk is the second talk in a row, part 2. If you missed part 1, it's okay. On a Zen poem that's in our chant book called The Merging of Difference and Unity. So it may be helpful to be looking at it. And I never seem to remember to bring myself a chant book. And somebody always has to jump up. Sorry. What page is it on? Somebody have it out? 11. Page 11. Written in the 700s by a Chinese Zen teacher. They would say Chan, not Zen. Just different pronunciations of the same thing. To encourage us around this same question of experiencing our true selves, experiencing our true world. Not the one that we have concocted in our heads. We come by it honestly right through our education and our upbringing. But something deeper than that. And truer than that. And beyond what we can quite think about. So last week we looked at the first page. So let's just briefly breeze through it. Good for all of us, and especially if you weren't here. The first part is sourcing the teachings with the Buddha. This first paragraph about the great sage of India. And just like I was trying to say about Dokusan, it's not about how good you are, how smart you are, how much you've studied. It's true for everybody. Sharp or dull, whether you're from the north or the south or anywhere. And then the second paragraph talks a little bit about obstacles, talks about grasping, talks about trying so hard to figure things out, talks about how it's right in front of us, but it's hard for us to see and understand. And then it goes on to say, really and truly, it's not something you're going to have a great epiphany one day, in the library. I don't have libraries anymore, I guess, but when you're reading, when you're thinking, it may come to you through an ordinary moment, with your ordinary senses. And there are many Zen stories like that. And that all this is happening in an elemental universe, a universe of earth and wind, and water, and fire. And even though we've since concocted a lot of other understandings of the physical universe, these are still beautiful and important for us. And then our assignment, the last paragraph there on the first page, is to really tune in. To open our eyes, our ears, our nose, our tongues, and to notice everything that arises. Carefully and fully. There's no unimportant stuff, it's saying this. There's no unimportant stuff. Contemporary, sometimes contemporary mindfulness teachers say, what happens when you are tuned out, or Zen teachers could say this too, I guess. Anybody could say this. What happens when you miss a moment, Well, you just missed your life, This is our lives. Don't miss them. And like all poetry, there's some imagery and metaphor which is not explained. An interesting image towards the bottom of page 11 about a tree. One way to look at it might be we're all part of the same great tree, the great tree of life. It all shares some essence, some deep connection, deeply, the roots deep in the earth. But we're different expressions of it, different leaves, different branches of the same tree. The last phrase there, each has its own speech, like we each have our own expression, right? So and the title of the poem, I didn't really talk about that too much, but merging of difference and unity. So there it is, right? There's a unity to all being the tree, and there's difference, you know. And if you look carefully at a physical tree, this is true, right? The leaves are very similar, right? There's you can tell this is a birch leaf, this is a cedar leaf, this is a Douglas fir needle. But you look really closely, you see no two are the same, right? They're different. So then the second page, he kind of foreshadowed this metaphor of light and darkness. This is the most important and most famous part of this little poem. So let me say a little bit about that. The first paragraph, which is just a couple lines in English, you know. We could study this for a long time. In the light there is darkness, but don't take it as darkness. In the dark there is light, but don't see it as light. So this doesn't seem like too out there, you know. We think today about the dark and the light, right? It's through our language and through how we talk about what's going on in the world and in our lives. We talk about light and darkness in all kinds of ways. So some of these human things, you know, I think have always been true and always will be true. And how ancient and how universal to think about the light and the dark. And the core thing that Zen tries to help us see, though, and this poem is trying to help us see this and study this, is we can get a little messed up by our language. The way our language always operates kind of in opposites. And they need each other, but they don't exactly have the meaning that we always think they do. So like take tall and short, you know, you can't have tall without short or short without tall. The way everything's radically relative, right? So we know this, you know. But it's wired into us through our language and our thinking. Dividing everything always into this and that and this, me and you, light and dark. So he's saying here, don't think they're quite so separate. The first line, in the light there is darkness, actually has the Chinese character for middle or central right in the middle of it, which didn't quite make the cut in the English. So right in the middle, interwoven, you know, intertwined in the light is darkness. And it's not like it's really bright in here, I'm going to find a dark corner, but there's darkness in the light itself. The light has the nature of darkness. But don't take it as darkness is interesting. Don't think that there's some simple way to then turn your dualism into just like a new dualism, you know. Merging of difference and unity. It's light dark, it's dark with light. It's light, it's dark. So our question in the end, at some point with these traditional texts, is always, well, how do we practice with this? One of the things the Buddha, the original Buddha, is famous for saying is, people would ask him like kind of abstract philosophical questions, you know, what's the nature of the universe kind of stuff. And usually he'd refuse to answer, and one of his answers is, I only talk about suffering and the end of suffering, you know. In other words, the rest of it is just like, you know, spinning your wheels. Which sounds like kind of anti-philosophical. And, there are layers and layers of Buddhism. It's probably better to say Buddhisms, plural, than Buddhism, because the different schools do have some differences to them, and some unity, right? It's all one tradition in the end. So I would say in our kind of broad school of Buddhism, which is called Mahayana, there is philosophy, absolutely. You can't argue with that, There's plenty of philosophy. Like you can apply the duck test, If it quacks like a duck, you know what I mean? It's also religion. If you're trying to avoid religion by coming to Zen, sorry. Also, the duck test also turns up religion pretty clearly. But anyway, so we do seem to have some philosophy, but in the end, it also is. It's a both and. It also is. It also must be a path to liberation, a way to freedom from suffering, or maybe more accurate to say freedom in suffering, since suffering can't exactly be avoided. But there's suffering and then there's suffering. So how do we practice with this? Well, maybe a simple way to take this metaphor of light and dark is just the usual way. Nothing wrong with that. Our usual minds tend to prefer the light, right? We want to be happy. We like being energized and excited and connected and fired up, Yippee. But we know through experience there's something sort of unsustainable and flimsy about that, incomplete. That somehow it seems like you also need the darkness, don't you think? Yeah, you need the darkness, and there's that part of us that's like kind of yeah but about that, right? Like, yeah, do I really? So maybe that's one way of practicing with this. To be a little lighter about trying so hard, which is what our mind is doing, to divide happiness from sadness, joy from sorrow. Are they actually so separate? And if you pay a lot of attention to your feelings, I think you're already seeing, maybe not, Maybe feelings that seem to be opposites of each other actually can be present at the same time and together. And maybe in some mysterious way they support each other. Then maybe happiness that feels the sadness in the middle is a stronger, clearer, and more thorough and complete happiness. And that when we're sad, that there's some joy there, somehow, too. One simple way of thinking about this is just through things I've read, maybe you've read too, about some of our great practitioners. Like His Holiness the Dalai Lama. This is a story I read one time that stuck with me so strongly. So His Holiness is in like his meeting rooms and Dharamsala in northern India, where he lives in exile with the Tibetan community. And he's having a good time, He's talking about the Dharma, he's joking around with somebody, And if you've ever seen any images or video of him, he laughs a lot, He jokes around, he giggles, This is like, one of our greatest Buddhist practitioners in all the world, He's a good giggler. It's a sweet little film, and it's a film and a book also about His Holiness's friendship with Archbishop Desmond Tutu of South Africa. That's worth checking out. Those guys would just goof around. And they both, as we know, have seen incredible suffering. Countries destroyed by hatred and division, and people hurt so deeply. So anyway, back to the story. So His Holiness is, it's a typical morning in his life, and he's already, by the way, practiced for like 5 hours. He gets up at like 3 to practice for 5 hours every day. So we have something to aspire to there. And then a new arrival from Tibet is ushered in. I think of it as a woman or maybe a family, and they're bedraggled and exhausted, you know. You can just tell they've been through hell. Because people still to this day sometimes manage to walk out of Tibet, you know, into northern India. It's an enormous journey. It takes like weeks or something through high passes, and, you know, like, so I'm sure people die on the way. And His Holiness goes to greet her and is instantly with her crying, you know, feeling the sorrow and the pain of losing their country and the oppression and hurt that he knows, you know, he knows she has seen. Doesn't know the details yet, but he knows. And connecting deeply. So joy and sorrow, you know. I heard a psychology person call it affective flexibility, but that's not quite the whole thing. It's not just flexibility between this and that. It's feeling the interconnection and interpenetration of all the feelings, all the emotions. So light and dark, you know, light and dark. And then it seems like it just kind of flips it the other way. The Chinese has a little variation here, which is kind of interesting. In the dark there is light, but don't see it as light. So the don't take it as darkness uses a character that means something like, instead of take it, it means kind of perceive it. It's hard to explain, and I don't really know the Chinese well enough, but it's not quite take it. It's more like understand it or feel it. Don't feel it as darkness. It's probably a little closer. But in the dark there is light. It does use the character for to see. So don't see it as light. Maybe it is because, you know, light is the thing we see, you know. So an encouragement to go deeper there. You don't just see the light. Maybe you feel the light. Other quirky Zen teachings talk about hearing sights and, you know, seeing sounds, you know, in the same kind of way. And in both of them, the same character. And it's a character that looks like it should mean middle. Maybe I'll screen share the Chinese if we have time in a minute. That it's all right in the middle, you know, not off to the side, not hiding under a rock. Right in the middle of our light is our darkness. Right in the middle of our darkness is our light. And it's not exactly ours either. It's just a way of talking. That is kind of like a trick of consciousness, you know. We come by it honestly, like I always try to remind myself, you know, it's okay, you know. Of course we think this way. To think that light and dark are so separate, you know. And one is good and one is bad. And all this made me think of a famous quote by Albert Einstein, of all people. It's one of the few quotes by him I know. I'm sure he's said a lot of other things. The quote is, "A human being is a part of a whole, called by us universe, a part limited in time and space." He used gendered language. I'll just clean it up though. They experience themselves, their thoughts and feelings, as something separate, something separated from the rest. This is a kind of optical delusion of their consciousness, the separateness. This delusion is a kind of prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires and to the affection for a few persons nearest to us. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening the circle of compassion, to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. Isn't that wonderful? Who would have thought, you know, theoretical physicists would talk that way? And I've checked the veracity of this, and actually it's legit. You know, you gotta be careful these days. Any quote you get by Einstein, Buddha, anybody is probably fake, you know. We gotta always look them up. So our separateness is an optical delusion of consciousness and a kind of prison for us. Not even a kind of, it is our central prison, right? Our separateness and how it limits us. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. And I think the way to do that task, which he doesn't say, is to see through this optical delusion of consciousness, right? To see through this separateness. In the light there is dark, in the dark there is light, right in the middle. In me there is you, in you there is me, right in the middle. And it's not something we can exactly figure out with our heads, right? Our heads do tend to dominate, at least mine does. There's probably some people here who are a little more body and heart centered, which is great, lucky for you. Because I think it's something we feel. Sometimes the word appreciate is used. We start to appreciate. Sometimes, like in the stories, there's a kind of aha moment, but often not, you know? It's more like it just sneaks up on you, like, oh. Maybe you don't even notice that you're not treating others quite so separately, or dividing yourself up in quite the same ways that you used to. Maybe you're just like a little more relaxed, a little more happy, you know, a little less uptight. And this is seeing through that optical illusion in some way. And that you are more willing to feel what you're feeling and not locking it down in some way by how you think about it and talk about it, just feeling it. So then, to help us kind of make sense of all this, and this is part of why I made a little bit of a big deal of walking meditation today, the author, whose name sounds something like Shurto, uses the metaphor of walking to help us understand the non-dualness of these dualities. Light and dark oppose one another like the front and back foot in walking. Isn't that beautiful? So like, you know, you do have two separate feet, you can see that, but it's kind of ridiculous to say you have two separate feet, right? You know? If you had two separate feet, your right foot could end up over there, and your left foot over there, and you know, where are you, you know? So the 2 feet are always one body, right? And they're 2 feet. And it's really great, like one's in front and one's behind and another one's front, so it's not like exactly a front foot and a back foot, but there are, you know, there are and there aren't. It's fluid and it's constantly changing. So this is a beautiful, beautiful metaphor, I think, for this, just to watch our walking and appreciate how rich that actually is. And the rest of the poem, I think, is pretty straightforward, which doesn't mean it's not profound and useful. So let's just read through it, and then I'm excited to have some time to discuss together what you think about light and dark in your own life. So each of the myriad things has its merit. Myriad things means dharmas. Each of the dharmas has its merit, expressed according to function and place. So everything matters, right? Everything matters. There's nothing that doesn't matter. There's no write-offs, or forget about that. But it matters conditionally and relationally, according to function and place. And it's just as it should be. So here we're talking about a Mahayana concept of sometimes called thusness, which is hard to understand, but here's a great description of it. Phenomena exist, box and lid fit. The way things just are, you know? The isness of things. Like, yeah. Box and lid fit. Principal responds. If you were here last Sunday, we had one of our senior students, Bob Rose, talking about Bodhidharma. It's great teachings on principle. So here, this is actually the same character. Principle responds, you know. There's nothing wrong with our ideas and our philosophy and our principle. But it doesn't exist on its own. It responds to what is. When the arrow points meet, this shows up in another Zen poem we chant. The arrow points meet. So just this, right here, right here. Then we have some practical advice. Hearing the words, understand the meaning. So we have to practice our whole lifetime to try to understand more clearly what's happening, what we're being offered. So we can never write anything off. You never be like, oh, I don't get it. Moving on. No, we understand. We learn. We listen again. We ask. Hearing the words, understand the meaning. So learn to understand the meaning, you could say too. And then we have great advice for all of us, and especially in the Zen setting. Don't set up standards of your own. It's a little bit double-edged for us in the 21st century, and probably all centuries. Don't set up standards on your own. Does this mean we're just passive and accept what everyone tells us? I was thinking earlier, I definitely identified when I was younger as a nonconformist. And we all learned how to say the word anti-disestablishmentarianism. Because it was like the longest word or something. Do you remember that? I've forgotten all about that. It just popped into my head today. Anti-disestablishmentarianism. Ridiculous. We're all like, 16-year-old brilliant philosophers, So we do need to think for ourselves, for sure. But something is lost if we let our separated self, lost in that optical delusion of consciousness, think it can figure it all out and knows best. Maybe the metaphor of a recipe is good. Our elders, our traditions, offer us some recipes. Probably good to cook from the recipe at first, see how it comes out, and then start making it your own. And similarly, the next line is basically the same thing again. If you don't understand the way right before you, how will you know the path as you walk? So there's a lot of humility suggested here. The egoistic self always thinks it knows where it's going, right? It makes its own standards and knows the path. But do we really know where we're going? How will you know the path as you walk? So we have a lot to learn. And we already know. So something here about deeply trusting that true sense of how it is. And being willing to push back when that's what's called for, right? How do we know? A lifetime question for sure. But maybe it's good to start by listening and then see. Progress is not a matter of far or near, but if you are confused, mountains and rivers block your way. So you will always be you. This is not about some future time and some future place where you'll be a different you or a better you or an improved in some way, free from all your whatevers. So it's not about going somewhere far or being right where you are. It's not about far or near. But if you're confused, if you're grasping, if you're reaching, if you don't feel the ground, it gets really hard. We all know this. We've all experienced this. Mountains and rivers block your way. And mountains and rivers is famous expression in Zen, shows up all the time, and actually means like the landscape or the world. So the world, everything blocks your way, the whole world. Sansui is mountains and rivers, like the name of our temple. So this temple is the whole world, the whole landscape. And I love the way the poet's voice comes through at the very end, reaching out to us from somewhere around 750, 740. Master Shurto says, I respectfully urge you who study the mystery, do not pass your days and nights in vain. Don't waste this life. We're here for a reason. We're here to serve and help. And I was about to say we're here to bring light, but that's not quite it, right? We're here to bring light and dark and light. We're here to heal the optical delusion of consciousness in ourselves and help everyone else heal. And this has the same kind of tricky, multi-meaning, multi-levels of meaning, right? Well, how do I know, if I'm passing my days and nights in vain? One could imagine getting very uptight, very upset, like, trying so hard. It's not it either. So these are all things for us to investigate. I mean, basically the whole poem is, how do you live in the way that's true, right? The way that's really true. And that probably whatever we're leaning into is a little bit out of balance, so we got to find, keep rebalancing, readjusting. Light and dark, dark and light. It's not a long time, but let's use the minutes that we have, according to the clock anyway. Time is kind of another optical delusion, isn't it, By gathering, as we did last week, let's just do it exactly the same. Keep things simple. Find yourself in a group of 3. Take turns speaking and deeply listening. I won't time it because there's not a lot of time anyway. What speaks to you here? What is the light in your life? What is the dark in your life? What did you hear in this discussion in the poem about how dark and light can meet in some way? How does it work for you? Please find a couple of friends. Say hi, take a breath, and then say, okay, I'll go first. I don't know what I'm talking about, and start.